I think the understanding here should be that if you're considering getting into this part of the industry, this part of gaming, is that first of all, is it legal or not in the area you plan to operate? And I think
Right.
that's a big deal.
Jeff, thanks so much for coming on today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. We've been kind of going back and forth a little bit since Expo, and here we are today. We finally get a chance. For the people who don't know who you are or anything about Sureway Gaming, tell us the backstory.
Yeah, thanks, Forrest. Glad we can make this work. Glad to be on this podcast, official interview process here to tell you a little bit about Shoreway Games and what we do and such. So for those that don't know me, because I'm not very well known, if at all, in the bowling industry. That's where we met at the Bowl Expo.
Right.
So it was a unique experience because from what we do compared to bowling centers, at first didn't make a lot of sense to me until I went to the expo, talked to some folks there, and then got a better idea. The bowling centers are so much more than that, right? And
Right.
we looked at the opportunity as something we might be able to expand our products into. So that's kind of the reason we went. But and anyway, what we do is we're a manufacturer by trade basically, but we design and manufacture game terminals and kiosks for use mostly in the gaming world, game terminals, which in itself has taken a completely different and positive growth in the industry compared to what it used to be, many years ago. Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I spend, a lot of times because talking to people about this, there's still a big impression with some people, especially on the amusement side of our industry, that feel like, there still should be a separation of the two, but they are becoming much more, intertwined than they ever have before. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. And I think we'll probably talk about some of that during this interview or this podcast, I should say. But, I've been in this industry for a really long time, and it's probably, I'm guessing now, over 30 years, somewhere back in the very late 80s or 90s. And just previous to that, I'll go into a little bit. I'm a military veteran, so I always like to tell people that because it explains kind of how I got my start in, like electronics or technology, because that's what I did in the military. I was in the Navy. I worked on the F-14 fighter jet.
Cool.
And yeah, it was really cool. I was stationed aboard an aircraft carrier, which is the USS Nimitz, and I worked on these really cool jets, fighter jets, and I handled all the communication and navigations and weapon fire control systems.
Right.
On these. And it's kind of where I got my interest in the way things work and the way things were built. But it turned out military life wasn't really for me. I did my 4 years and got out, and then got a job in the private sector, doing virtually the same thing on airplanes, only on private planes. Take away the weapons controls, because obviously we don't need those.
Right.
Yeah. But they still need to navigate and communicate, right? And
right.
I was just literally tearing apart airplanes, taking out the old stuff and putting in the new state-of-the-art electronics, whatever state-of-the-art was back in, the mid-'80s.
Sure.
Yeah. And then, so I know it's a long backstory, but basically what happened was we hired a technician there, and he worked for us for a couple years. He's also a good friend of mine. And then he decided he wanted to leave and get a new job. And he ended up working for a company in the amusement side of this industry. It was a manufacturer out in New Jersey, and they were designing and building redemption equipment. So after he was there for a little while, he called me one day and he said, this company could really use a guy like you. They're getting ready to hire somebody in operations. So why don't you interview for it? And so that I did. I interviewed, and they hired me shortly after. And, I got the bug, man. I fell in love with it right off the bat. I really did. And kind of hit the ground running with that, and then just continued on in the industry, virtually ever since.
Very cool. Yeah. So it sounds like gaming would be pretty easy after working on airplanes, right? And aircraft.
Well, I don't know, Forrest, if you've stood in front of a true casino level, slot machine, as we call it these days, you almost need a rocket science, a degree to check out what's going on in these monitors.
Sure.
they're pretty complicated, but we don't do that level, and there's a good reason for that too. But you're right. It's still the correlation though. Really, is I love the build stuff. I like the design process. I like to see it come together, that tangible experience, and then kind of plug it in and see it come to life. That's such a cool thing for me, and so I always knew I wanted to continue to do that. And you were asking, well, how did I get into this, part of it? So I mentioned I started out on the amusement side, which was a really cool experience. And, years and years later, I started working with customers in this segment of the industry. We began, designing and building, specific cabinets for that brand only, right? So we were a third-party manufacturing facility for some of these brand names. And that was also a cool experience. But, I was kind of hamstrung, if you will, by a few things. One was, it was only a product line that could be used by that specific customer. So we call that OEM in our world,
Right.
And then, so that was one thing that it was limitation for me. The other thing was that most of the time we were building for pretty large companies, very corporate run organizations with a lot of money and a lot of layers of individuals. And that sort of thing just turned out not to be for me. There wasn't enough creativity in it and such. So, yeah, I decided to get, kind of take a step back, or, some guys or people would say a step down, meaning from that level of gaming down to the next level, which is a much more widely spread part of the industry. And that's the skill-based gaming that my company is primarily involved with now.
Right. Yeah, and walk me through the history of that, because that seems to be something with maybe some recent changes in legislation that has really taken off across the board. Walk us through maybe how that's come to light.
Yeah, that's a great question and a really good experience and story. And I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast where the old sort of impression of this was kind of smoke-filled rooms, small wood ugly cabinets with tiny monitors, right? And now it's really has emerged into a grade A experience, and I mentioned before about the casino level games. Our product line, skill-based games, are every bit as good looking as a casino grade game. The cabinets are now metal for the most part. The screen size has increased to beautiful 43-inch vertical, in a lot of cases curved monitors with lots of LED lights going on the cabinets and some really stunning graphics. So that has helped. What the question you ask is to bring this industry along, this part of the industry along to make it legitimate, if you will.
Right.
And there are two sides to it, of course. There is to every story, I think, right? But
of course,
I think the understanding here should be that if you're considering getting into this part of the industry, this part of gaming, is that first of all, is it legal or not in the area you plan to operate? And I think that's a big deal. And you mentioned that, a lot of states or areas are converting, or starting to legalize this part of it. And the other way to say that is if there's no law, then it's assumed it is okay to operate, because there are some cases where they're just like, nope, this does not work here. You can't do it. Right. But then there's understandings in place. And, we'll give an example like the state of Wisconsin, for example, where this is widely operated. And there's an understanding with the Department of Revenue there, that you keep your books, you keep them accurately. And, you pay your taxes on all that income that comes through the bill acceptor on your game terminals, and everybody is happy. It's only the people that deliberately try to, get around those, sort of rules that end up, ruining this part of the industry or ruining a good thing.
Right. Now, is there like a listing or a central place where you can figure out where your state lies? Because every state's a little bit different. Like if someone wants to know what the rules are for their state, where would they go for that?
Yeah, it's really hard to track that down. It basically lives on kind of the state website, and you got to kind of dig into the fine print, if you will, because often I wish they made it easy for us. Like there was a tab that said, here, gaming here, right? But it's often buried, in deep down in some other legislation that was tried to pass or is passed, right? So it's difficult to find. And then just to kind of make it a little bit more complicated is that within a state, each town, city, village, whatever you want to call it, could also enact their own rules.
Right.
You know, and I'll give you another example here in the state of Illinois, which is where I live and my company is located. Right. So here, the regulated gaming is legalized in the state of Illinois. Right. Regulated gaming is exactly what is, you know, in the state of Nevada and New Jersey and all those places. Right. And what that means is the state recognizes it, and there's a procedure and plan in place that puts all of these game terminals out on location, and all the revenue is split accordingly. And at the end of the day, for the state's purpose, they get their tax revenue from that income that goes through the bill acceptor, right? And that's why it's regulated. But there's also, you know, some specific cities, if you will, or towns within the state that just don't want it, right? So they have enacted code through their own power that says not in our town, and that's totally within their power, right? So that's an example of what I was talking about before. It's a little bit difficult to really, you know, find that magic button that says, yeah, I can operate these here in my, you know, in my bowling center in this case.
Where do you guys currently do most of your business? Which states do you do a lot of your work in?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So, you know, your home state of Pennsylvania, for example, is a big state for this business. Wisconsin, previously mentioned, right? You got some North Carolina business, Virginia, Florida, you know, and Georgia, and you know, also all these places have some pretty brisk business in this area.
Okay, and then so you're saying you got to basically look it up on the state and the local level to know whether or not that you can even have the games.
Yeah, well, that's a start. Like I said, it's not easy to find, you know. So basically, and I can tell you how this works in a lot of cases, and that's what I think is really cool about this segment of the industry. So I want to back up a bit and talk about that because, you know, why I love this part of our industry so much is that the operators that, you know, buy and operate this equipment on location are very down to earth, easy to work with people, right? And so they're just out there, you know, busting butt, trying to make a living, and you know, trying to keep their games running, right? So a lot of times, what will happen is that, you know, a location who's not currently operating games will be in another location and see it, and they'll start to wonder, oh, how do I get this? You know, and it'll start that. It'll start a phone call. They'll go over to the game terminal, look for a sticker, for example, and see, you know, here's Lou's operator over there with a sticker on it. Call me if you have trouble. You know, Lou answers the phone and says, hey, yeah, I can put games. You know, it's kind of like that sort of thing, word of mouth in a lot of cases. So that helps tremendously. But there's friendly people that exist here, and you know, to a point, right? Obviously, you're not going to create a competitor for yourself, you know, with the place next door. But, you know, within reason, you know, it happens a lot like that for us.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then do you like help people through that process, tell them where to look, or you're just like, hey, go figure it out. And if you're allowed to, we can help you out, or what does that usually look like?
Yeah, it does. It happens a couple different ways. So first of all, you know, we try to do most of our marketing or, you know, advertising, if you will, at trade shows, right? So we pick and choose where those are. You know, when we were at the Bowl Expo, we didn't exhibit, right? But I walked around and talked to a lot of people. Our major trade show that we do every year is the AEI Expo in March in Las Vegas, which is the Amusement Expo International. And I'm really involved in that. I'm on the board for that show. And, you know, even within my own industry, which is the AAMA, you know, I'm currently the volunteer president for that industry. So, you know, it keeps me quite active. But that's one place we can put our goods on display, you know, and it's amazing the amount of people, operators that are in this part of business that come up, and you're all day long, you're talking through things, right? So that's one way that we can find out what's going on. Because what's the first question? You know, you either look at their badge, right, or you talk to them and say, where are you operating out of? You know, and you can instantly tell. So there's a pattern that emerges there and becomes quite obvious pretty quickly. But here's another great example of how this works, I should say, is that, you know, through the AAMA, right, and the network that I've developed from volunteering so much of my time, you know, people obviously know what we're doing. So I got a call from a guy that basically designs game room centers, and he wasn't sure if one of these game centers he was working on could operate these games. So he called me and asked me to do a little homework on that, and I did. And he also directly connected me with that particular location and the owner of it, and eventually, everything proved to be cool, right? And it was legal. It was legal there, and so forth. And we ended up putting a package together and getting it on location. And what's really interesting about that is that it's the location opened up as basically a sports, bar type thing. And they had, sort of more amusement related stuff, video and pinball and stuff like that. But
Sure.
they had seen, like I previously mentioned, down the street or wherever it was, a couple miles away in another location, some of these game terminals, and it piqued their interest, right? So that's why it started the chain of phone calls that kind of happened that ended up in my lap through a network, person that I'm really close with, and we were able to get some games down to them. So that was a really cool experience.
Yeah, it seems like the more the network grows, the more people who have it, the more you can call on and kind of get proof, right? Hey, this person's running it, not having an issue. If you're down the street, then obviously you're more than likely going to be okay.
Yeah, it's always safer to do your homework too, right? And make sure that these things are legal in your town and that you're going to operate them legally. Because, the last thing you want to do is spend a bunch of money and put, a game together and then turns out you can't have them there, right?
Right.
So that's a big part of it, obviously. And then it's just got to be handled like you would any other income to your business where you're reporting earnings and paying your taxes on it. So
right. Yeah, and I guess that's probably a whole other plot of research is how it gets taxed as well, whether it's lottery or everybody's probably a little different.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't pretend to be, or I don't want to come off on this podcast as an expert in that area, and I'm not. That
right.
We leave that up to the operator. What we do is design games, and I should back up a little bit too, and just tell kind of qualify that. It's interesting when we first started in business, we were strictly making a cabinet. Or a game terminal that could hold anybody's software, right? So there's kind of different pieces to this pie, if you will, right? You need the game terminal that's got a monitor and all the, hardware and stuff so you can operate games in it. And then there's the software developers who make games that are computer boards, right? That go inside. Sure. So we partnered with those guys and put their boards into our game terminals. It's now led to the point where we have our own software coming out, which will be, launched here, probably in the next, let's say, couple months. Yeah. And then it adds another product line that we'll be able to supply. And, one thing leads to another, and after we were doing game terminals for a while, we also had a inquiry from a customer that wanted to know how they could, automate their payouts after a player plays, and they win. These games pay out cash, right? Which again is legal. So they wanted to know how they could kind of automate that process and take the cash handling out of the hands of people within in a location, right? So let's just dial up an example here, if you will, on here about, let's say you have a bowling center, right? And, they want to put game terminals in, and without an automatic payout solution, they may have literally a cigar box or some sort of a cash bag behind the counter. And, Forrest, you play, you just won $112, and you got this ticket, right, that says, hey, I won $112 on it. I want paid. The old way would you go up to the counter and that person would count out 112 and hand it over to you.
Right.
So, obviously you can see some holes in that little process.
Of course. Right. Right.
So one of our customers got kind of tired of that and plugging up those holes. So he asked us to develop a machine that could do that. So, we did. It was really fun. This is now, we're probably 4.5 years into it, but it was quite the development process, and it's a kiosk that automates payout. And it's,
Very
for
cool.
all, description, it's an ATM, right?
Right.
Only you can't use it for an ATM. At least this model you can't, but it'll validate and pay out a ticket. So things just continue to grow along those lines. So it's really cool, what happens as you get into business with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I didn't know that you even had the ability for that, because I know that is a major issue for a lot of these people with the lottery and the skills is that cash control.
Yeah, and then in this segment of the industry, we were the first to come out with a product, because again, it didn't exist. So we got
Mhm.
this question asked, and we were really interested in trying to do it. And now there's probably four or five at least competing products that do the same thing.
Mm.
And on one hand, you're like, you'd love to have exclusive to all that, but on the other hand, it's really spawned another segment of the industry, and it's
Mhm.
really cool to be part of that too. That
Right.
you had a hand in developing something new that
Right.
has really helped a lot of locations.
Yeah, leading the charge.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
mm.
exactly.
So let's switch over maybe from some of the legality and qualifications and switch over more. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like the business model of how these work. Tell me a little bit maybe how much people can expect to make or how the business works, or dive into a little bit of that, if you will.
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question. How much can people make? And that's the lure of these machines. Obviously, I think let's start
Mhm.
with this. Gambling is loved by a lot of people, right? And so that's the one thing that at the end of the day, that's what happens here, right? We're what we perceive it as is more entertainment value, and it's when you're looking at one of these machines, and you see these just gorgeous graphics with gameplay that is, a lot different than the old, triple sevens on a screen. Right now, you've
Right.
got all kinds of great, icons and pictures, and the theme, right? As you see a lot of things
Hmm.
in any type of game is really important. So that attracts players to a game, and that's what you need. Just so you need a good looking machine and a pretty popular location that's got some traffic, right?
Right.
And then that get the players coming in and let them start playing the game. So contrary to, I guess, a lot of belief, the machines are designed to pay out frequently. You know, which is really cool because I mean, if you just think about it, if I'm sitting in front of a machine or you are, Forrest, you want to win, right?
Of
So
course. Yeah.
so the idea is that you're feeding wins to the player, and this is all done through algorithms within the software, and I'm not that
Hmm.
software engineer, so I can't explain it. I just know generally the way that works. So if I'm sitting there playing, even if I play a hand and I win 12 cents, just for example, right? But that happens continuously, it accumulates, right? And now you can choose either to bet that back or keep it in the kitty, right? And play
Right.
some of your other money on the machine. So it's kind of the premise here is pay out frequently. Maybe they're not so big, but every now and then they will be. And, and that keeps the player playing. And what's happening at the meantime, they're being entertained in front of the machine, right?
Hmm.
So I guess to answer the question a little bit differently is, most locations have a limitation of how many game terminals can be in it, and
Right.
that round number is somewhere between 5 and 6. But I've seen as many as 20 and 30.
Oh,
Again,
wow.
that all comes down to your location and what your state or even your city or village says, your town says.
Sure.
Uh, but if you look at this from an operator standpoint, what's it going to take to get into the business? And most game terminals with the bigger screens, like I talked about, turnkey with the software and games on them, are probably going to end up costing somewhere around let's call it $7,500 a machine, just for round numbers,
Okay.
right? Just in that area, and let's say you're going to put 5 of those in. So you're close to a $40,000, investment just on your game terminals.
Right.
Um, a lot of locations like to put in nice chairs so a player sitting there comfortably keeps them at the machine again even further, right?
Right.
And then if you want to add this automatic payout solution, this kiosk I talked about, that's going to, depending on the model, let's call that another 12,000 just for average cost. So somewhere around that $50,000 to $55,000 mark, you're in this business.
Okay. Hmm.
Um, Now I've seen good locations with really good games on it. Each terminal earned maybe a couple $1,000, a week.
Hmm.
Some do even better than that. But again, we don't want to overpromise anything because
Sure.
so many factors, right?
Hmm.
And then the other big thing you have to decide is how is this going to work? If I have a bowling center am I going to take this on and operate them by myself? And if that's your model already, for example, if you're operating pinball and video and whatever else in your game room that's in a bowling center, you're probably used to that, right? Meaning what? You also have technicians, right? You have, or maybe there's a collector that's the same person as a technician. So you kind of have that support, and personnel already built in. And in that case, you will get 100% of the proceeds in your cash box, right?
Sure, right.
The other model is what? There's an operator involved and he's using your location, right? So then you're in some sort of a split revenue scenario, and, which can be anywhere from 40-60 to, 70-30. I mean, there's all sorts of things out there. But generally speaking, the operator in this case doesn't get the, let's say, equal share. And what I mean by that is, let's just say this. Let's say you're in a location and you have a bowling center, right? And you ask me to come in and operate my equipment. So there's no cost to you, number one. So, I've got now $55,000 in product that I put in there, right? And I'm going to offer you, let's just say I offer you a 50-50 split for discussion, right? You're going to get 50% off the top of the cash box, right? Now, my 50% also includes the support I've got to do, right? Which is servicing the machines, be on call for when something happens, emptying the cash box, right? And then, of course, I got to amortize my equipment costs that I put in there. So, in that scenario, if I'm a location owner, I think I'm going that route, to be honest with you, because, it's a lot less headaches. I'm taking my 50% off. It's passive income, for the most case, that is really cool. So, right off the bat, day one, you're making money in that scenario, right? If you own your equipment, then it's a different story. You can expect probably to pay that package back in about a year's time, 18 months time, probably at the most. And a lot of times it's even faster.
Okay. Yeah. So you're saying if maybe about a $65,000 outlay, you can expect about 65 per year in revenue on those. So first year you're paying it back, and then from then on you're putting a couple $100 away or a couple thousand away each month.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably a very conservative approach. A lot of times it's faster, right? And again, so many factors are involved, right? And but you're doing your homework first too. You want to make sure that you've got the traffic that can support it, and maybe it's only a 3-game setup, or you put 3 in and holy cow, now you need 7. It's just all you kind of feel you through it.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of variability, but at least you're saying conservatively they could expect maybe a 1-year payback.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Very cool. And so then where do you see the people who are doing it well? What are they doing? Are they creating a separate space? Are they what are the people who are seeing the best returns doing? Is it just high volume? If someone wants to do this, how do they do it well?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, my recommendations are, first of all, let's start with what a player, I think, really wants. A player wants to go and sit in front of a game terminal and be entertained. And they want to do that in a nice, clean space, right, where they can have some privacy in so doing. So to your point, a little separate room, off the main floor is really an ideal setup. If you've got one, great. If not, build one, right? Because again, the payback's there. This is a good part of the business, right?
Yeah.
And then, the other thing is you got to keep those machines clean. It's so funny. We have the opportunity to go out on a lot of locations, and here in our state, for example, there a lot of the locations include convenience stores or gas stations or whatever.
Right.
And, and some of those are just absolute pigsties. I mean, I want to wear my rubber gloves when I,
right.
And that's all on the operator. You can't force them to do it. But, picture yourself, if you've got the choice of 2 locations, which one are you going to go into? Obviously the nicer, cleaner one. So that's a big thing and a great way to, get this. And, I think like this, think about it sort of setting up like a mini casino, area within it, and you've got the nice clean, the lighting's just right, meaning on a little bit on the dimmer side. You've got, some music playing, right? There are, here's a thing that a lot of people do that have that setup. They'll offer, like a complimentary, Coke or water, right? Because you're just sitting there playing, right? So again, you're just kind of making the players feel like they're getting their money's worth, they're being entertained, right? So it's another good way to look at it. And then, where do I see it going? I really see this becoming more, as laws continue to favor this, and again, meaning that I think in general that basically means is, as long as the state is playing in, the cash box here, they're going to be happy, meaning they're getting their tax revenue, right?
Right.
And if that happens, it should continue to grow along the lines of what, basically a casino is doing, right? Only in areas that people can't travel there, or it's not convenient for them to go to Vegas or go to Atlantic City, right? Or wherever else these places are, right? But they can go to their local, bar, pub, bowling center, in this case, wherever, and have that same experience, right? So if you build that attraction, they'll come. Secondly, I would like to see more promotional, and it's, there are some products, and we're actually helping to develop some products that'll do this, to where you can promote your business and attract players in, rather than just sort of sit there and hope people see your little sign that's in your center, right? So what does that mean? It means like maybe some push notifications, right, to your cell phone, right? That's text, hey, come on in today. We're going to add XYZ to your gameplay. Things like that I think will help promote this business and make it, more of something that becomes mainstream, compared to where it was, way back when it was on the other side of the track, so to speak.
Right. Now, is there different legality as far as the advertising for those?
Yeah, there is. And again, I think it really has to do with, the value of things that you're offering. I'll bring up another type of this gaming that is, legal, and I think the way that they make sure that people stay within the law. There's a category that's called sweepstakes games, right? That basically the premise behind it, Forrest, is that a player can walk up to a machine and have the opportunity to get something without putting money into the machine. So in this case, what it basically means is that there's a coupon that the machine will issue that has some value to it. And what that value is might be some points or a discount on a website that sells particular things, like, uh, let's call a small appliance, a toaster type thing, a blender or something like that, right? So, for example, you'd go on that website and, you see a $60 toaster, but I've got this coupon that offers me $5 off, right? And that coupon came from a game terminal that's operating as a sweepstakes machine. So that's one way of that this is, legalized and make sure that it's not being operated, as a sort of a cash only device.
Gotcha. I see. So that does change a little bit about what you can do to promote and get people in.
Right. Now, and technically speaking, sweepstakes category games are legal across, the whole country and all 50 states, but again, every local town, city, et cetera, has the opportunity to roll that out. Right. So it's just, again, do your homework, and talk to people that are doing it now, right? Get referred to some, experts and make sure you're covering your bases.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a big opportunity, especially if you're looking for additional product lines, revenue streams, and you have the volume. I think it's a no-brainer to add something like this, as long as it's the legalities there.
Yeah, and I'm particularly intrigued by the bowling center opportunities, just because we haven't done a lot of business with that, at least that we know of, right? I mean, we a lot of times we sell to operators and don't know where games go, right? So that's interesting, but I don't think that's the case. And if it is, then this should be a pretty wide open opportunity, for areas where these are legal, and I can easily see a bowling center putting in a group of these games and doing quite well, for people that are there, bowling, they're between games or they're not bowling, right? They're done and they just want to go do this for a while. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. Both the centers that I'm involved with have it. is up to their a limited allotment.
Oh, really? Cool. And that's in Pennsylvania, both of these?
One's in Pennsylvania, one's in West Virginia.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And what's the limitation of those both, Forrest? Yeah, it's definitely 6 in PA, and I, again, it can change, not specifically in PA, but within a state, it can also be a difference of how many games depending on the town or city, right? So,
Right.
yeah, West Virginia is a very interesting one. So that's great. I mean, you have direct experience with it, and so you said involved. How are you involved in those?
So I own a minority stake in one of the centers in the center in West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And then the guy that I partnered with, the one in West Virginia, owns one in Pennsylvania.
Oh, got it. Okay, very cool.
I work closely with him.
Oh, awesome. All right, good. Yeah, you're pretty deep into this stuff then.
Yeah, exactly. This is live and breathe, right? Yeah, every day. But yeah, I know we're coming up to the top of the hour. If people are interested in learning more, or they want to find out, if it's right for them, where would you like people to go, or how should they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the website is always up there, right? So shorewaygaming.com or shorewaygames.com, they both reach me. So that's one way to do it. And then, they can always call us, and we can flash some numbers up later if you like, and just start with a phone call. We go through this process, pretty casually, right? I'm not the hard sell type guy. I really want to make sure we're getting product in your hands that, first of all, you can legally operate, and secondly, it's the right product for you. And we'll go through the mixes of what that means, different types of games that will do well for your particular location, your kind of your mix of people that come in, right? It's all important, and we'll just help you put something together that works.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's an important approach, especially for something that's kind of newer and lesser known, to kind of help people through that process.
Yeah, and again, one good example is that I mentioned this previously in this podcast was the customer that came through to me from my networking wanted initially to put in a bunch of games. I kind of pulled it back a bit, and I just said, look, why don't we start with about half of what you're asking to do? Just get your feet wet a little bit. You haven't operated this stuff before. Not that it's difficult, but it's new, right? So let's make sure that you can support it with the right technicians and such. Let's make sure you've got the right foot traffic. When you get that and you see how well it does, we can always add. We're not going anywhere.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the right approach. Cool. Awesome, Jeff. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I always love talking about this whenever I talk to you. So maybe we'll have to do an update in a couple months, see how things have progressed.
Well, that'd be very cool. I'm excited, and I can't thank you enough, Forrest, for putting this together. It's been a lot of fun really chatting with you, and I appreciate it.
Likewise. Yeah, thanks for your time, Jeff. I appreciate it. Yep. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon. Bye.